Raising a child with special education needs is both challenging and rewarding. Each child is unique and requires an individual strategy to help them succeed. Today, there are more students with learning disabilities than ever before. But a need for special education isn't the only thing that's rising in America's instructional climate. Homeschooling has grown to include a significant portion of America's K-12 students. And that leads us to today's topic, special education in homeschooling. Joining me in the studio is Rochelle Somerville. She holds a PhD in psychological cultural studies, works for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association as a special needs consultant, and is a homeschooling parent. Dr. Somerville, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I am really, really excited to be here today just to share my experience and to talk about homeschooling students with special needs. So thank you.
Well, we are certainly excited to have you join us today. And so let's just jump right in. What led you to study special education and become who you are today?
Well, this is definitely a journey that has been super exciting for me. Interestingly, I was not homeschooled myself, but I grew up in a very, what I call educationally rich setting. My mother was a teacher by trade herself, and my father was a policeman. And what I remember about growing up is that I remember love learning as the process of learning. And even now, I've never stopped actually loving learning. And so naturally, when I started my own family, my husband and I, we didn't really think about homeschooling per se, but we thought about just instilling that love for learning in our kids and those aha moments of learning. And so we actually have 6 kids, 6 very different kids that range from, my youngest is 8, then we have an 11-year-old, and then we have twins that are 13, and then we have a almost 17-year-old, and my oldest is second year in college, and he is about to be 20. And
Wow.
So they have all been homeschooled all the way through. And my husband is the only child, and I am one of 4. And our children are very, very different. And we have 3, which we call, these are our kiddos with hidden disabilities, is what we say. Because if you run into them, you will have no idea unless you have very intimate discussions with them. And we have one that's twice exceptional. And then our youngest 2 have some speech issues. But as throughout their educational experiences, there have been seasons where they have just needed different things. And given their seasons, I couldn't imagine being in the traditional, in the box public school system where they had to move, at the same place, at the same pace as everybody else. And then, seeing the freedom of homeschooling, what homeschooling gave to my family. This is kind of what led me into the field of just wanting to advocate and share with other people what homeschooling can bring. There's a lot of misconceptions about homeschooling. And so this is where I am now, kind of sharing that information and knowledge and I just want to dispel that myth that families with students with special needs can't homeschool, because they can.
Absolutely. Well, we have a lot in common because my wife and I have 6 children too. 4 boys, 2 girls, but ours are a little older than yours. Our youngest is turning 30, I think, here in a few days. And we actually have 20 grandchildren. And all of them are special and all of them have needs, but that's a whole different thing there. But here's what we know. Every child is special. Every child has their own capacity to learn. Some are incredibly gifted in other areas. Some have a harder time working through certain things, but it's how the child is engaged, how the opportunities that child has to work through those things. And really, I believe that one of the most important advocates that every child has are their parents, because the parents typically figure these things out earlier. And if that parent is a strong advocate for the child, wherever they are in school, that child is going to do better. But let's zero in just a little bit more now into the homeschooling space. I mean, we know that there have been just massive changes in homeschooling for over these last particularly 20 years or so. But one thing that we do know, most people, when you think of special needs children, they don't think of homeschool as a strong place to get resources. I mean, the public system has, a lot of money that flows into that space, whether those are always well resourced or not. But that's kind of, okay, you got a special needs child, you've got to get them into one of these schools where they've got people who are really qualified and they've got the resources to give them the help they need. Most private schools don't actually have a strong history of working with special needs. But as we delve into the homeschool situation, you're saying that there are quite a few homeschool students that are being dealt with their special needs. Talk to us more about that.
Absolutely. As you know, you hit it on the nail. Historically, we definitely have made tons and tons of progress. There have been drastic progress made over time. And the passing of IDEA in 1975, you're talking about, students were excluded completely from receiving, any services from the public school system. And then in the early years of IDEA, the focus was on just giving them free and appropriate education. And as time progressed, clearly, we started to see some of that happen, but we have ways to go. But then again, COVID hit, something we just didn't expect at all, which shut down everything. And, I call it a mixed blessing because what COVID did was it showed the inadequacies that students were receiving, but at the same time, it allowed parents to see how equipped they were at home, because they had to do it. And so, what we saw was the school scrambling to address the needs of students with special needs, and parents didn't have a choice but to step up and adapt very quickly because their children's education was in jeopardy. Interestingly, the National Special Education Advocacy Institute estimated that there are about 38% of the 2.5 million students that are homeschooling that actually have special needs. And this is 3 times higher than the 14% of students that are served in the public school special education programs nationally. And so, in one sense, this is exciting because more people are finding themselves homeschooling with students with special needs. And so it is becoming more of an option. But one of the reasons that you mentioned is that what we see is we don't see it as a viable option because we attach those resources with being in the public school system. And I love the fact that you asked the question, are these resources attached to the public school system? And a lot of times we think they are, but they actually aren't. There are services in the public school system, but the great thing is that the flexibility to choose is outside of the public school system because those resources definitely, they are there. The only difference is that you become almost the administrator where you now have to find and orchestrate those services. But they definitely are out there. Tell people all the time, if you choose homeschooling, to set up your village first as a first step to homeschooling.
So that's interesting what you're saying. So we know that some states have much more, choice options and their legislation, education policies and so forth gives more parental choice. And we're seeing more and more and more of that, which is a good thing. The question I have is you mentioned that, this is really not necessarily always tied to the public system. Now, is that state by state?
So in general, each state makes up their own rules. So each state has their own rules that, of course, when you begin to homeschool, you have to figure out your own state's rules. In general, I think it's important for every family to know that school districts are not required to provide support when you decide to homeschool. So it's at the discretion of the school district, and the provision of services has to be agreed upon by the supervisor in the school district. And all services are then provided through the school district or in the private schools by a licensed provider. And it could be done in the schools or it could be done in your home. But the important thing to remember is that it's not required. So just understand that if you choose to homeschool, that doesn't necessarily come with you. But the great thing is that HSLDA is the largest homeschool advocacy organization, and we serve over 100,000 members that choose the freedom to homeschool. And one of the services that we provide is finding these resources for families. So anybody who chooses to homeschool, I highly recommend that you join HSLDA because we are like your bank of resources. In every single state, there are resources, and there anything from grants if your child has communication issues or mobility issues that they need, or if you need services, there are grants. We can find that we help members to identify resources in their area. I also recommend that families, every state has a state homeschool organization. And if you find your state homeschool organization, they can also connect you locally to your services. And so those are two places where I highly recommend, if you choose to homeschool a student with special needs, that you connect with those two organizations, because they are the ones that point you in the right places for your resources. And that is the one thing that makes it difficult to homeschool, is putting those resources in place, because in the public school, it comes to you. But when you homeschool, you have to go get it.
Yeah, that's a great statement there. Reminds me, in our own family, not immediate family, but my wife's sister had a child who had retinal blastoma, and at a very early age lost both of his eyes. And so they lived in the state of Ohio. And if they had put him in public school, then he would have had all the resources, all the equipment, everything he needed to study Braille and to learn in that way. But because they wanted to homeschool, no resources were available to them through the state, and certainly in their area, and they just wouldn't provide anything. And so the family had to, they really had to go out and work to make this happen. Fortunately, a very generous individual provided all the equipment and everything that was necessary. But the mother had to take and work through all the assignments working with that child. But that child is excelling, has graduated top of his class, has a university education, and is a professional musician today, and incredibly gifted and talented young man. And so a lot of times there again, people are afraid, my child has some special need, and, it's hopeless unless I plug him into an established system. But that's not really true. The real reality is, yes, you're going to have to be creative, innovative, and work hard. But nobody's going to work harder than you as a parent, and because you have the most interest in the success of your child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you nailed it right there. And I love what you said, going back to the original statement that you said, is that parents, regardless of what your situation is, are always going to be the biggest advocates for the kid. We sit in a position of knowledge that no one else has. I mean, even before, think about just a simple trip to the pediatrician's office before you actually go in the door. I mean, you filled out the form that's giving them all the information that they know. So although we go to them as the experts, you are actually the expert on your child, because without you giving them the information, they wouldn't be able to perform their job. And so we sit in the role of the experts, even in the school system, but we simply give teachers the title.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Well, you've shared some resources, certainly your own organization and the homeschool organizations, that those are very and may I add, for parents that maybe aren't experiencing this, they're just considering these things, the enormous growth in resources now that are available to homeschool parents. It is phenomenal, the kinds of resources that are available to parents, the networking groups, the associations, so many different things. You want to speak a little bit more about that, just specifically, before we zero back in specifically to the special needs. But I mean, this includes the special needs area, but some of the changes that we've seen just for homeschooling parents.
Sure. Just in general, to piggyback on what you said, what COVID did was it put a lot of things online, and so access to information is all online, and so you no longer have to go out and go to any specific place, and it's not an inconvenient location. I mean, literally, the information that you need is at your fingertips. I mean, and if you want to find a location where you can find a person, it's still at your fingertips to then go find that resource. But even at this point, COVID again was almost a mixed blessing because there are tons and tons of curriculum now that are free. And so regardless of what your financial situation is, you could really homeschool for pennies. There are quality curriculums that you can do for a little less than nothing. So at one point, I mean, you were talking about almost spending a paycheck on curriculums, whereas now you can literally homeschool your child almost for free. And this includes the specialized curriculum that you would ordinarily buy for students with special needs. And so this is really for everybody. And so this is really a great time to homeschool. The flexibility of individualizing the curriculum, the social aspect of creating a program that's centered around your values. A lot of times when you're dealing with students with special needs, everybody has a set of gifts and everybody has just skills that they need to work on, and not working on and prioritizing those gifts and fitting them into your family rhythm. This is definitely the time to homeschool. I mean, you can create a system that fits whatever your values or whatever your system is. And, some people are always concerned because, what do I do? I'm a single family. Well, we have answers for that too. And so this is truly, truly a situation where homeschooling fits the freedoms of any scenario. There are homeschool pods, homeschool co-ops. There are situations for every situation you can come up with. And so part of creating that village is that village of resources and that village where you can find information or somebody who's done it, somebody who will encourage you. And, the other thing I tell parents is to be realistic about homeschooling, because that makes a big difference. A lot of times people think that when homeschooling is not easy or doesn't feel comfortable, they're not doing it right. But you also have to be realistic about homeschooling, right? It's kind of like parenting, right? Parenting is not easy, right? Think about when you brought your child home, right? You brought that baby home and the baby just cried. That wasn't easy, but we did it, right? We did it because we are invested. And so be realistic about homeschooling. There are natural stressors that come with homeschooling. Your kids are with you all the time, right? The first curriculum you touch is not going to be the last. There are going to be behavioral things. Your kids are going to test you. Why? Because they're kids, right? And we're going to work through that. And there's going to be some slow progress. There's going to be no progress. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. And that's just about being a parent. And that's part of homeschooling. And this is why you're going to find your village and you're going to surround yourself with like-minded people. And that person who, when you're having a bad day, is going to say, get in your car, let's go for ice cream, right? And that person who you can socialize with, and that person will listen to you vent, and they'll say, yep, keep going, right? And so these are just parts of homeschooling that you're going to do when you start homeschooling.
You said about the realities of homeschooling. And by the way, everything has its realities, homeschooling or not. But it reminded me of something our pastor was saying Sunday. And he said, when you go and you have your child, the first thing your doctor wants to hear is your child cry. right? Because that's, they move from one world into another, and their lungs are craving that air that they have not had. And so when they're crying, their lungs are filling up with that air and so forth. And he said, and so, then, so the first thing that the doctor does is they want that child to cry. And then you spend the whole next year trying to figure out how to stop them from crying. Now that's reality, right? And that's so true. There are all these dynamics going on in real life that, and sometimes it is that process of figuring things out, and there is no perfect formula where everything happens and rolls out just perfectly. Every day is not Hallmark card, right? And that's just part of that reality. But let me ask you this. So you're a consultant and you consult parents in the homeschooling space regarding their special needs children. Do you have a story, maybe a favorite story, success story of some kind that you'd like to share with our audience?
Oh my goodness. I could go on for days. I don't have just one, but I'm going to tell you, just recently I was on the phone. I got one of the calls at HSLDA, and it was a mom. And basically she was asking me what was the process of putting her kid back in school. She wanted to test the kid, or she wanted to figure out, her child was transitioning to high school, and she feels like she's just done her child a disservice. Her kid is still 4 grades below and behind in work, and she just feels like she's ruined her kid. And so now it's time to get her back on track. And so she just feels like it's time to let go and to let somebody else get her back on track. And I said, well, I don't understand what exactly is the problem. And I said, have you always homeschooled? And she said, well, I didn't always homeschool, but my goal was to get her back on track, and I can't do that. And I said, so she wasn't on track when you started homeschooling, and so you thought you were going to catch her up 4 years in 2 years, and then she didn't catch up for 4 years in 2 years, and so now you're discouraged. And she kind of hesitated. And she says, well, and she thought about what I just said, and then we just kept talking, and I said, well, sometimes homeschooling is a mind shift change. I said, is she happy? And she says, oh, she loves homeschooling, but she's not learning. I said, well, what is she not learning? And she says, she's not learning the information. I said, well, and we just started processing. And we started talking about the life skills that she had learned. She's happier. She's able to advocate for herself. She asks questions now. She asks for clarification. All of these skills that she was not doing when she was in school because she was bullied. And then at the end of the conversation, Mom was just in tears. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what have I done? And then Mom just started praying on the phone and thanking God for the conversation. And I said, so is there something specific that I can send you or give you? And she said, you have given me everything that I need. She says, all I need to know is which curriculum you are recommending for us to do for high school, because she's not going anywhere. So sometimes it's not necessarily that, this is what I mean by finding your village, right? Because sometimes you need somebody to talk you out of the space that you're in and kind of give you a reset and assure you that where you are or where you've been is exactly where God has placed you. That little girl is right where she needs to be. She has come so far, but Mom just needed to hear that. And it's a mind shift change, because when you have students with special needs, they don't move at the same pace as everybody else. And everybody a lot of times wants to check off the box. And our kids with special needs are not box checkers. We need to look at other skills. It's not the academic piece a lot of times where they grow. And so a lot of times you need that community to kind of reset you.
Great story. And, here's the reality. There isn't any child that just naturally is a box checker. right? These boxes were created for a system to kind of do some self-evaluation, just to make sure that the system and the student and they're meeting certain standards of learning or whatever. But that is not a normal educational process or even necessarily a developmental process. And here's a statement I want to make too. Every teacher, special needs or not, whether they're homeschooling or if they're in a public school or a private school, every teacher has their days and sometimes weeks on end when they're grappling with a particular student that they're trying to help, trying to get to some new level. And they have that same sense of desperation that mother had on the phone with you, when they just feel like, I don't know if I can do this. I've tried everything and they're not meeting the expectations that there are. And so I think whether it's a homeschool parent or a teacher anywhere that may be listening to this, what's important to know is that understanding that child and continuing to learn and engage with that child helps you to understand over time how you can get through and figure out how to advance that child at their level and where they can go. Some areas they're going to flourish, other areas they're going to be slow. That's okay. The important thing is, are you helping that child grow and learn and be a healthy, comfortable, confident person? And that's really the biggest part of what giving an education is that mentoring process of that child to help develop them and give them the tools so that they can move on and really equip themselves for life as best God has given them capacity to do. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Dr. Somerville, as we are kind of wrapping up this show, are there any additional comments or encouragements that you want to leave with homeschooling parents or the needs, or maybe they may not be homeschooling their children, but maybe they are parents of special needs children, and just something that you want to leave for them?
Well, I just want to remind parents two things. The first thing is that if you are considering homeschooling specifically, I truly believe that homeschooling is a calling. And when you are called to homeschool, you're also equipped. So remember that. God doesn't call anybody that he doesn't equip. That's the first thing. And then the second thing to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, your kids don't care how quickly you can take them through a curriculum or how closely they are in line with their peers in terms of the knowledge. What they care of is that they are in a supportive environment and they know that somebody genuinely loves them and cares about them. So keep that in mind, because that is the big picture of homeschooling, is that you are providing a loving homeschooling environment for them. So if you are interested in contacting or getting involved with HSLDA or reaching out to us at HSLDA, you can always go to our website at www.hslda.org, or you can reach us specifically at 540-338-5600.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Somerville, it's been a pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you so very much for sharing with us, and thank you for the work you do and the work your organization does. I hope that many parents will be encouraged by what they heard today, and that they'll reach out to you to get more assistance and to tap into resources that you have available for them.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share experiences and just encourage families that are considering homeschooling, and just families that are willing and wishing for more information on how to support their kids.
Well, that wraps it up for this session. Thank you for listening. I'd like to invite you to visit our website at nwef.org. That's nwef.org. And check out our blog where you can search for articles that cover homeschooling, special education, and much, much more. And we hope we'll catch you next week right here on the State of Education podcast.